the history books are riddled with examples of people who thought that they understood the big picture. And usually that leads to genocide, extreme poverty, inequality, horrific violence.
Don't forget the asymmetry of this issue, right? You only need to get it wrong once. You only need to hit one catastrophic or existential risk.
For all of human history, we've had moments where it felt like, oh, this is the discontinuity. This is the moment where everything is going to break. This is the Malthusian trap.
One of the greatest issues to me for the whole Metacrisis conversation is that...
Welcome to Radius of Reason. I'm Levon with my co-host Andre, and today we are flipping the script on the Metacrisis narrative. Is it as dire as we've been led to believe?
And this episode is going to be a debate. To move the conversation forward, we've welcomed two guests onto our show. Alex, you've seen in our previous episodes, and we're also very happy to welcome back Maryana, who previously joined Radius of Reason on episode 26. And as a reminder, Maryana is a strategist at Wikipedia and also a techno-optimist. So she has some very interesting things to say about the Metacrisis.
So I'm going to start off by defining the Metacrisis, and then I'll hand it over to you, Maryana, to kind of go over why you think technology is going to save humanity. Okay. So in my view, the Metacrisis is a framework for understanding the core problems humanity faces and their root causes. So when we talk about the root causes of things like climate change, ecological destruction, runaway AI, nuclear war, we're specifically referring to the patterns of behavior that not only have created these problems, but sustain them. And I boil it down to three things. So, competitive arms race-like dynamics. Number two, self-interest over collective well-being. And number three, a tendency to narrowly define problems so that the solutions to these problems actually end up creating more problems, i.e. unintended consequences. And so what arises from these three kind of basic patterns is a recommendation that we need a more holistic approach to problem solving in the way that we build and use technology. Does that kind of make sense to everyone?
Yeah, that tracks.
Okay. Maryana?
Well, thank you for framing that up. I would like to posit a meta-crisis, if you will, that is equally compelling and unfalsifiable as the thing that you just described, which is that, human history is fairly short in the grand scheme of things. And for an even shorter amount of time, but a significant amount of time, about, I guess, the late medieval era to about the world wars, young, smart, enterprising men of means, such as yourselves, would typically enter into the university system and be given sort of a canon of knowledge to understand the world. There were a set of books, thinkers, frameworks for approaching like what is even going on, what is happening. Around the World War era, things started breaking down. You know, we had postmodernism, a lot of different things coming up to call that canon into question. And it's never really recovered since then. And I posit that there's a big crisis of knowing today for, again, young, enterprising, intelligent men of means such as yourselves. And the vacuum has been filled by internet gurus who offer very compelling, tight narratives to explain everything, a framework for everything, which is very enticing to a mind that's kind of grasping for meaning and grasping for a way to make sense of and make better the obvious problems that we encounter every day around us. But, as someone who has been very skeptical of any grand narrative, including the ones that the old canon used to teach us, I've found it very difficult to understand why people are so ready to jump on these new narratives that have just literally emerged like 10 seconds ago on the internet by some guy, such as Daniel Schmachtenberger, who has not really demonstrated deep understanding of any of the problems that he's sort of surfacing at the core humanity ending level. He's not a climate scientist. He's not an economist. He's not a political scientist. He's not a historian. He's not a lawyer. He's not engaged deeply with any of these subjects.
I don't think he has a job,
I don't think he has a job. He doesn't have a Wikipedia page, which, that's the thing.
That's fine.
So what I'm curious to hear from you all, I guess, is, what brought you to this narrative of these are the core set of problems, these are the root causes, and these are the potential solutions, as opposed to many of the other grand narratives that are very popular today amongst men of your demographic, such as the Jordan Peterson grand narrative, other kind of more conspiratorial grand narratives, the manosphere.
Hold on. I think we'll just have the shortest podcast that we've ever recorded.
That is enough, Maryana. How dare you say anything against Lord Schmachtenberger?
Let's re-record. You can't say any of that.
How dare you? Okay, so let me take a stab, and then I know Andre and Alex are dying to weigh in too. But if you guys are enjoying this debate and want to stop the Metacrisis, there is something you can do.
You hold all the power. You can like this video, subscribe to this channel, or leave us a comment.
So first and foremost, I didn't see you actually talk about the Metacrisis itself. You referred to it as a grand narrative that just arose very recently and is propagated by Schmachtenberger, which I don't think he originated. I think it's just an idea that's kind of organically arisen based on the times and based on our latest understanding of human nature, history, etc. So I think that was not a fair representation. As far as Schmachtenberger goes, I think he's working on the Consilience Project. He is genuinely, I think, contributing to this, and I think communicating these ideas is a very valuable job. And in fact, it's a lot more valuable than what most people are doing, in my opinion. Shit. So I completely disagree with that framing. But I would like to make sure that we focus on the ideas themselves and not necessarily Schmachtenberger or anyone in particular, because it's about whether the idea and the claims have merit and not whether, the ecosystem has this person or that person or these narratives or that. Like let's focus on the idea, especially in the way that we've just defined it.
If I may interject, something I did hear Maryana say is that it's an unfalsifiable claim. It's an unfalsifiable framework. So I think that would be an interesting thing to address is the Metacrisis a falsifiable claim? Or is it just a fun narrative?
Well, I think painting something in a very broad context, which I think the Metacrisis tends to do, is, I don't know if it's intentional or unintentional, but it does make a viewpoint inherently unfalsifiable if you make it about everything. It's very hard to pinpoint it to a single, a single linear narrative, and therefore it's very difficult to refute anything that's being said.
But it's not, and it's not because, first of all, there is a collection of these problems that humanity faces, which you can falsify, right? Like Maryana can go through in this show and say climate change is not that big of a deal. We have these solutions. We have carbon sequestration. We have all these new renewable technologies. You can go down the list. Nuclear war, actually, the mutually assured destruction has made things more peaceful than not. Like, you can go through the list and put up arguments that say, actually, we're not in a crisis. So that core premise falls apart, which more or less destroys the Metacrisis. But then you can also go and tackle the claims about, okay, these are the underlying incentives, these patterns of behavior, these collective action failures are actually not collective action failures. They are just, whatever. So you could go through piece by piece and show that the premises that are involved in this narrative and this argument are invalid or inadequate or weak or whatever. Like, that's all up for grabs. So I completely disagree that it's not falsifiable.
But it's also a Hydra problem, because the second Maryana I met, and we're just talking on behalf of her, but I imagine if Maryana started refuting.
I'll let you speak.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
We'll be right back to the show, but first, Andre has a quick message.
Subscribe. Yeah, but and others who I listen to try to refute things like climate change or the threat of a nuclear apocalypse, it's a Hydra problem in the sense that for every crisis that is refuted, another crisis will be brought up to justify the point that we are facing compounding crises as humanity. If it's not climate change or nuclear war, it's, you know, poor management of the crop system. I think
Rogue
it's
AI.
you know, the thing that interests me about the meta crisis is that it is in essence kind of a modular hierarchy into which you could start plugging in varying like problems that we're facing as humanity. And in that sense, it is very hard to refute because, yeah, if somebody has an argument down to talk down climate change, which I think is bold move, you could always introduce another problem humanity is facing. Does that make sense?
And at the core of this is a strong belief that all of the problems humanity is facing are united by root causes that we can fix, that we can identify and we can fix. That's the part that I think is just, I mean, that's just a belief. That's not something you can prove or disprove.
I would jump in there and say that I can't speak for Levon on this or other people who buy into the meta crisis, but for me personally, I don't really see the meta crisis as this all-encompassing framework. I don't think it explains every problem that humanity faces. I think it is simply a good framework for explaining some of the biggest problems that humanity faces. In particular, like catastrophic risk type stuff, like nuclear war, climate change, any situation in which we have Molochian forces, where we have collective action failures, where every individual action perpetuates a system that nobody wants to end up in. So stuff like bioweapons and such. Those are the things that I think the meta crisis is useful for explaining.
So, I kind of disagree with that, Alex. Actually, I disagree with all of you, basically.
Okay. Set us straight, Levon.
I think actually the meta crisis framework does allow you to go more fine grained and analyze things like dating apps that we've talked about on this podcast, and I think they follow the same kind of patterns. And it is kind of a scalable framework in that sense. But regarding the idea that it's this like grand narrative and that therefore it's inherently too vague and like you can't disprove, like that also is problematic because the whole point of the meta, or one of the central like points of the meta crisis, is that we are not taking a holistic view of things when we generate new solutions and technologies. And that in and of itself is a problem. That is one of the central claims of the meta crisis. And so it is inherently a meta thing. I mean, the term meta crisis makes a lot of sense because it is a meta crisis of sense making and problem solving. Okay. So you guys are criticizing an abstract idea for being abstract. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't really make sense. Oh, it's just abstract. It's like, well, that's what it's supposed to be. Like to have that level of analysis, to have a framework at that level, it is supposed to be abstract. You cannot literally create a more concrete framework to address the problems at that scale.
Then why should it be taken seriously, I guess, is ultimately the question. I'm gonna step back. I'm gonna let Maryana ask the question.
Well, can I ask, let's just like get into the parts of this that just kind of fall apart for me. And the holistic view really is one of the like central things that to me feel like extremely sus. Because this idea that, you know, we need to take a step back and see the big picture is sort of built around a non-existent viewpoint. There is no way to see the big picture. The world is far too vast and complex of a place for any individual or group of people to like step out of and look onto and determine and sort of puppet master a different set of solutions to. This has never existed in all of humanity. There's never been a time in human history where an individual or a group could step outside of everything that's happened around them, all of history, and say, oh, I see it. Here are the problems. Let's fix them. So, you know, I almost feel like my reaction to hearing you talk about this is like everything that you think about the meta crisis is like the core essence of it, the most important element of it. I would flip on its head. I would say no. Holistic thinking is not possible in a world as infinitely complex as ours, and as deeply complex as all of these problems are. What you actually need is what we've always done, what humanity has always done since the beginning of time, and which has brought us here to this wonderful podcast with all of these technologies, with all of these ideas in our heads, brought to us by all of human history. And that thing that we have always done is we've kind of chipped away at all of the little problems around us in little silos, and sometimes coming together to break through those silos organically, finding ways to connect and solve bigger problems and bigger problems. Yes, there are massive coordination problems that are very hard to solve, but we have solved them. Every single new challenge that's been presented with every increasing level of complexity, we've solved by just understanding the problem in front of us and figuring out how to solve it. No one has ever needed to take a step out of the system in order to fix it. And most of the time when people have attempted that, it's ended very badly. So communism, great example. Let's step out of history and fix all the things that are broken with history, right? The history books are riddled with examples of people who thought that they understood the big picture. And usually that leads to genocide, extreme poverty, inequality, horrific violence. It's pretty much always been a bad thing. So yeah, that's my thoughts on holistic problem solving. So please tell me why you think the Metacrisis is different in this regard. Like, who is going to be stepping out of the system and looking at it holistically?
We need to step back for a second, because you're
even further. Let's go to the meta crisis.
No, I mean, it's true that when a term like holistic is used, it everyone has kind of like a sense of, okay, what does that mean? It is true that it is impossible to, let's say, generate a complete model of reality and then try to like test all new ideas within that. That is absolutely true. And that would be a crazy approach. You would never get anything done, right? Because it's just an impossibility. It's not really what the Metacrisis is saying. It's saying try to consider the whole to the best of your abilities type of thing. Not like you have to have a perfect model of reality and then plug this thing in and see how it behaves in it. Like, that is not the claim. And that's certainly not what I've heard Schmachtenberger make. And I haven't heard any reasonable person suggest a thing of that nature. So that was, I think, kind of maybe a misunderstanding of the Metacrisis or the solutions that are suggested. But I do understand that sometimes the terms are a bit vague, but there's a communication problem.
So someone decided that these are the problems and these are the root causes and these are the solutions, right? Who decided that? Was it Schmachtenberger? Like, who in this kind of loose coalition of people who are really into this idea and this framework decided and pinpointed these specific problems, these specific root causes, and these specific solutions?
The definition that I offered in the beginning was my personal definition from all the content that I've consumed. I cannot ascribe it necessarily to any one individual. I think I've heard Schmachtenberger talk a lot about those things. He's read it. I mean, he's read a bunch of books. He's talked to a lot of people. He's formed his own ideas. So I think it's something that arose through multiple paths. So I can't speak much further to that. But like, I just want to kind of go back to this whole issue of the holistic solution suggestion. And it's that we just need to do a better job of trying to account for negative externalities of our solutions. And that's nothing that you would disagree with. There's literally no way anyone.
Yes.
Sure. But that's what's being suggested.
But I'm saying we don't need a new framework for that. That's how we've always operated as humans.
Well, if I don't know, it's not how we've operated, because the solutions that we've offered have continued to cause massive problems down the line. Like, yes. We continue to.
I do have to say, I think one of the greatest issues to me for the whole Metacrisis conversation is that in painting the compounding crises humanity is facing, oftentimes the successes of humanity are ignored. And the narrative doesn't necessarily include very real triumphs of collective human action that have brought about fantastic resolutions, because they're not very sexy, because you can't make a wonderful thumbnail out of the international postal system, for instance. Nobody gives a shit about mail. But the fact that, and I've brought this argument up many times in previous episodes, but the fact that Alex can post a letter from the United States and it's going to get to Sri Lanka, that is a miracle. That is a phenomenal thing. But that's never treated as a human success. And there are varying levels of this, I think, throughout our current modern experience, where we time and time again do show that we're able to look at a logistical or a problematic structure and then change it to fit the needs of humanity collectively, despite the differences that we do face.
Well, I think the Metacrisis by definition is focusing on kind of the issues at hand. I mean, that's the purpose of the Metacrisis. So it is true that it doesn't highlight the positives, but I think it's because it kind of assumes that most people are going along with the progress narrative. And to be clear, and I'm sure Schmachtenberger agrees with this too, is like there has been plenty of progress. Like we want a world where penicillin exists. Like no one doesn't want that, right? Like there's so many cool things about technology,
yeah.
But I think the point is like to create a system where Alex can send that, letter to Sri Lanka or wherever. There are all these other trade-offs, and the point of the Metacrisis is to highlight the trade-offs that have been made, right, in this global economic system, which has created a lot of prosperity from a material standpoint, but now it's also leading to massive pollution, resource extraction, climate change. So what happens when, you reach these planetary boundaries, these tipping points, and you get 5 degrees Celsius of warming and you fuck the planet for future generations? Like to me, that seems like a hell of a crisis. And the science on climate change, which I've been really digging into as of late, is not good. It is not pretty. And the coordination that we have to solve to try to figure out how to go away from fossil fuels, which are the entire basis of global economy at this point, that is a problem that humanity, the likes of which we've never faced, and there's no precedent for solving something of that scale. We've done little things like the ozone depletion issue with the Montreal Protocol. So coordination is possible, but we need to talk about this, and we need to have frameworks like the Metacrisis that try to compel us to look at the whole, which, again, it's not necessarily even a novel framework from that standpoint, right? Like Schmachtenberger is not the first person to suggest that. The Metacrisis framing is just a convenient term to talk about some of these ideas, but these ideas have been around for a while. So, I guess
just to kind of recap that in a slightly different way, I think the Metacrisis is a framework that says we have to keep in mind these negative externalities, but in particular, the negative externalities that come with progress, because the cool thing about progress is that it tends to be exponential. That's why we live in an unprecedented time of amazing riches and resources. But with that, the other side of that coin is that the negative externalities are also exponential. And the thing about exponential growth is that it sneaks up on you. And if there comes a point at which you have to address the issue before you actually encounter the problem. Because if that pond with lily pads in it fills up, then you can't do anything about it. But the day before, that pond was just 50% full, to go back to a thought experiment on exponential growth that we've talked about before. So that's the main concern that the Metacrisis talks about, is how negative externalities of progress are exponential in the same way that technology and progress itself is.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to think about it. And what I would bring in now is that, it's a continuum until it's not. And at some point there is this discontinuity. But for all of human history, we've had moments where it felt like, oh, this is the discontinuity. This is the moment where everything is going to break. This is the Malthusian trap. This is the end of gas. This is whatever. We're all going to starve to death right now. We're at the end of history. In any given moment you could point to in history, you will find people saying and thinking really and really deeply believing that like they are at the end of history, like nothing else after this. And it's a kind of a profoundly egotistical thought to believe that, you know, you are the last generation and you are the ones who are going to have to really figure it out. And everyone else before you had it easy. Their problems were so much easier. So, you know, I am a Bayesian, as I know all of you are, and I have some strong priors. And one of my priors is that most things are a spectrum and a continuity. There are very few cases where there is a binary suddenly in the mix. And I think it's really hard for me to see this moment in history as something that is profoundly different from everything that came before it. And I see the logic of, compounding progress, compounding complexity, reaching a point where maybe there will be a moment where it all collapses overnight one day. But certainly when it comes to things like climate change, I mean, I think there is no reputable scholar that is saying, you know, there will be one day we will wake up and the world will be molten lava. Like, no, it'll be a steady, continuous, you know, bad outcomes kind of piling up on each other, but certainly not.
No, but steady is the wrong word, because the feedback loops can lead to exponential.
Yes, I understand.
Runaway effects. So,
how do you know that this is the moment where we need to like really step in and really change everything?
Well, you look at the science. That's how you know. You don't assume because the past we didn't have crises of these magnitude that therefore we're okay. That because
I'm saying we did.
I'm saying
crises of this magnitude.
Well, we had crises for sure, and sometimes like. We didn't solve the Black Plague, really. We just a bunch of people just died, and it was a crisis and it was terrible. And the point is the same thing can happen.
Yes.
And I think maybe to better illustrate like this particular argument, let's step away from climate change and look at nuclear weapons, right? I think that is something that is very, very unique to our moment in time, because the destructive potential of a nuclear bomb has never been wielded by humanity before. Kind of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I think, really did unfold a brand new spectrum to the human experience, where we do all of a sudden wield power that can just wipe entire civilizations off the face of the earth. And I think that is markedly different from any moment in time in the human experience. Barring, you know, like whatever the space weapons that Aztecs had, but we don't know much about that.
You're a big Ancient Aliens fan.
Oh God!
Right. But that is a very unique position we're finding ourselves in that we haven't had to face down. Yeah, like Napoleonic armies had like innovations with cannons and shit, but like
lots of unique positions. I mean, the joining back together of the old world and the new was a very unique position that led to a lot of catastrophic outcomes. But, you know, we survived it.
But 100 million Native Americans died.
Well, I mean,
right?
Yes.
Like,
conservatively speaking, yeah.
Okay, but I mean, like, I don't. So to be clear, so just to make sure everyone is actually on the same page, the Metacrisis is not saying like humanity is necessarily going to wipe itself out, right? I mean, it could with nuclear weapons and things like that, but like, it's not necessarily the claim like, we're going to totally wipe ourselves out. It's like, hey, there's these catastrophic risks. Let's try to mitigate it. And I don't see how anyone could not want that. Like, why would you be against like trying to mitigate some of these risks? Like, to me, it doesn't make sense.
I think anyone on this call disagrees with you about needing to mitigate risks. I think the disagreement is, do we need to bring a new framework into this to make this happen, to resolve these bigger, more complex problems?
Or do we need to bypass or abolish existing institutions that have been organized with checks and balances in place to address some of these things? Because I think that is the far more interesting avenue to explore, where if the narrative is that, the current systems aren't functioning, that means we need to create a separate approach to resolving these issues. But that approach may not have scrutiny or a hierarchy of audit that could happen to ensure that nobody is exploiting the particular system. That to me is the far more compelling suggestion that comes out of these things.
Yeah, just to make sure we're not talking past each other, I think there are two pieces to the metacrisis framework here. The first part is the identification of the problem, and that is we need to figure out what the negative externalities of our actions are going to be. And it sounds like Maryana doesn't have any problem with that idea. So in that sense, I don't think that part of the metacrisis is a new framework. But then there's the second part of this, and that is the proposal that often comes out of the metacrisis framework, is that we need to, because this is a global coordination failure, or a set of global coordination failures, we need coordination mechanisms at the scale of our problems. We need more importantly, we need new systems at the scale of our problems. Or at least we need to somehow modify our global coordination mechanisms at the scale of our problems. And that might be the more interesting claim to tackle.
And at least that's where I start having issues. But
communism red flags going off. Like we're
not communism red flags. To me, a very good example, and I don't have any evidence that like somehow Peter Thiel is involved with Daniel Schmachtenberger. I probably have my own string.
He's not involved.
Right, yeah. But I mean, so a great example is like the claim that's often made. It's like, well, the EPA isn't effective at its job, so we shouldn't really be spending taxpayer money to fund it. But if you look at the trend of the EPA consistently getting screwed over either through a legal framework, like the Chevron ruling that just came through, last month, the consistent cash-strapped nature a lot of government agencies run on, and it's a gradual wearing away at institutions that have been put in place to regulate and oversee certain elements of our society and our economy. And then those institutions are pointed to as abject failures. And I think any narrative that starts really shaping up and catching up steam, I'm very sus of like Silicon Valley, as everybody knows on the show. I'm always like, well, this is just another drive to deregulation. It's another drive to abolish the controls that have been meticulously put in place to regulate the private sector, communism, and that's where my suspicions start taking off. But maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves in this debate. Maybe we haven't finished discussing that first layer that Alex kind of introduced. And we're kind of jumping straight into
I think there's a bridge between those two pieces.
Yeah.
I think you have to first fully establish that the problem is a set of global coordination failures. And I wonder how we can go about diving more deeply into that specific claim.
And to piggyback on that, I think you have to show that the problems are severe enough to warrant, like, hey, we need a new system, right? So if the proposal is a new system, and it's not, so there is no Bible of the metacrisis. Like there's no like official proposal. Oh, the metacrisis proposes that we destroy capitalism and replace it with X. That doesn't exist. Schmachtenberger's doing a lot of research with the Consilience Project on it. Like, from everything that I've read, like, I don't have a 100% like clear idea of like, okay, we should absolutely revamp this system, but keep this and do that. Like that. And I don't think that's even realistic. Even if you had a system ready to go, if you formed like an abstract concept, like we did in a few episodes ago, the meta-treaty model, that was the sort of third attractor system. Like, it was just a thought experiment. But even if you like created this perfect system in theory, like to try to implement, like you don't just go and like implement it, right? Like I think society does need a kind of iterative, path to change where it's a little bit it's more digestible than, but at the same time, you have examples of like the U.S. Constitution where that was people in the room, elites that Andre hates. There are people in a room that sat down and they figured out some shit, and guess what? It's, arguably the best political system that's been devised in the history of humanity. So
didn't expect some chest thumping happening here. Then that's
so I'm just you will say, yeah. So I think we need to focus. You always have to focus on the ideas, and like part of the paradigm shift that would occur with a framework that is truly like abiding by some of the metacrisis principles is that it would have the strongest like self checks on it to prevent corruption. Because the biggest problem with current systems is their ability or their inevitability to decay into a corrupted state. And I think any new system, whether it's a treaty for international coordination on a particular issue or a new governmental system for a particular nation, like the core thing you want to do is like, how can we make this recursive in the sense that it checks itself, it prevents corruption, etc.
If it does devolve into corruption, how do you go about fixing it? Yeah. So I think it's important to keep in mind that currently there is no, like you kind of touched on, Levon, there's not actually a solution that's currently proposed yet. The idea behind the Metacrisis is that at the very least, the current set of systems are leading to a bad outcome. Whether we live in the end times or not, the idea is that the trajectory of the current set of systems is leading towards a potentially bad outcome. And if we're not living in the end times, all the better. That gives us more time to figure out how to avoid that trajectory. But the main central claim that I care about is that we need to think about how the current set of systems are leading us towards that bad outcome.
And that's also a great point, Alex. We do need to think about the existing systems and how severe the problems are. And let's tackle that in a moment. But I do want to, like, the point that you made, like, if we do have more time, like, actually, you know, it will be nice to have more time to create a solution instead of like it's imposed upon us. We don't have time. We're scrambling. Like, maybe the time to create like the ideal system or a better system is when things are going well, right? So like that's also
historically humanity has responded really well to challenges and not so well to times of plenty. I mean, we developed mRNA vaccines for COVID real fast. We could have developed those way earlier, but why? Why bother?
But mRNA technology was developed far earlier, and it was during a time of stability.
But we knuckled down and we did it for COVID because COVID was a problem. It was facing us dead on, and we got it done.
if you ask Joe Rogan, I mean, the vaccines weren't that good. So.
Sure.
I would agree with Levon that the only reason we were able to knuckle down in the time of crisis is because there was a subset of the population that was like, we need to work on this.
Yes. I guess my point is not to argue and should we go faster or should we go slower? My point is we've done it. We are doing it. We are doing the thing that you want, Levon. We are doing the thing that you believe will help us get out of all future crises.
Some people
we are getting together to solve problems. We are doing it slowly and inefficiently and clumsily, but that's the story of humanity. It's the beautiful story of how we got to this moment.
Okay, this is a good point. So yes, we are. Some of us are for sure. Like there's
just us in this podcast. Nobody
just
else.
Us in the podcast.
Who else do you need?
There's a Stockholm Resilience Center. Has a bunch of people working on things that you would consider like all Metacrisis related, like climate change, ecological stuff. Like it's fantastic. There's people, they're not using the term Metacrisis. They're just working on shit, and it's very helpful. And like, I think we need to get away from the idea that the Metacrisis is like this sort of like framework, like communism or something. Like it is just a general like philosophical idea, and it's a convenient term to use. So let's get away from that. But
let's taboo the word Metacrisis.
No, it's taboo now. Or we need another word.
I don't think nonprofits should be working on it. I think that all resources need to be channeled to well-functioning government institutions that have scrutiny and can be audited.
That are corrupted by
the only reason they're corrupted is because we're not paying attention to the system of governance that's overseeing these institutions.
Right.
And so instead of, and I guess I'm shooting myself in the foot in this sense, because instead of watching YouTube videos, people just, participated in their government, participated in going to town hall meetings and voting, then we could start actually returning some of the teeth and the integrity to very functional government programs that we have. But instead, nonprofits start popping up with no accountability that to me are just havens for tax evasion. And they put out their papers and everything is fine, but true action and true progress has only come from a standpoint of government. My position.
Right. But then like you Yeah, I mean, you want so
Government getting things done. What?
I think, yeah, Andre. I mean, I think the issue there is though, like the policies that are proposed or the policies that we develop to then implement or suggest to government or to government officials or whatever, like that, I think should come from principles that abide by what we've mentioned with the Metacrisis, right? Like, so you want to make sure the policy you impose doesn't do more harm than good. And the government, of course, has a notorious track record of doing the opposite, right? And so the Metacrisis, the people working on the nonprofit stuff, like, I think that's all just like small pieces that ultimately contribute to the whole understanding of what the best strategy may be. And that certainly involves policy changes. I mean, you see people trying to impose some of that with social media and age restrictions and so on and so forth. Like, that's all people, that's people like one of the biggest advocates of that is a guy named Tristan Harris, who's like best friends with Schmachtenberger, right? So like, this is something that is tangible, that's happening, that is working within the existing system. And so all that has to happen. I mean, you're not wrong, Andre. Like, I mean, I don't disagree with you. It's just like, there's no reason to say, oh, we need this or that. It's like, we combine the two things.
Well, my reasoning is, where's the money coming from for this research, right? Who is funding it? And I don't have any optics on what their purposes are, like what they stand to benefit from this kind of stuff. And yeah, we can assume there's like an altruistic billionaire somewhere who truly cares about the fate of humanity. But, in my experience, anytime there is a third party institution claiming to be unbiased, and I think the greatest example of that is the think tank circuit in Washington, D.C. You have a bunch of organizations that receive funding from various sources, 9 times out of 10 defense contractors, that are writing and researching foreign policy issues, and then they provide suggestions that eventually get rolled up into government policy. All of that tends to benefit the donors to these institutions. So when we have organizations in Sweden or the United States that are engaging this kind of research and development, or I mean, R&D kind of makes it sound a little bit too blue collar. Come on, let's be blunt here. But what is the purpose of who is funding it and why are they funding it?
How are you ever going to identify whether the idea that comes out of a particular organization, think tank, nonprofit, whatever, is good or bad? Well, you have to evaluate the idea itself, right? Of course, it doesn't look good if the people funding it, like, oh, it's from fossil fuels. That already casts some doubt. But the truth is, like, that is a logical fallacy. So, like, you have to look at the merits of the idea. It is possible
I think you absolutely have to know who is trying to advance a certain idea forward. That is an absolute necessity before any rational.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah. Rails.
Yeah, it's a little off track.
Can I just say that I love this because I think it highlights what I've continued to say and will continue to say, which is the way that things work now is a messy, complicated jumble of personal interest, donor money, governments, nonprofits. It's a market of ideas. And yes, there's a ton of money funneling certain ideas to the top, but also a lot of money funneling other ideas that contradict those ideas to the top. And it's a terrifying reality that we live in, but that is how the world works today. And somehow, despite all of the like lobbying and influence economy, we still have pretty good outcomes at the end of the day. Like, we're not living in a complete dystopia that like nuclear waste isn't surrounding us, the sun isn't on fire, and like just
a quick note, Maryana. By 2050, it's predicted that there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish.
So what? So what?
I mean, that's not good.
Tell me why that matters. Tell me why that matters.
Well,
how does that not matter? I mean,
tell me why that matters.
What? I mean, self-explanatory. Like, there's nothing I could tell you beyond that point.
Forget about the fact that like no one can predict the future. That the confidence intervals we're talking about are insanely massive. Like, it just why does it matter?
I mean, I think it's self-explanatory why more plastic.
But why
in the
do you
ocean
think?
Than fish.
Okay, why do you think a coalition of brilliant Metacrisians are going to somehow magically make that not happen?
No one's suggesting that this coalition of magical Metacrisians is going to do that. But hold on. I wouldn't
that's the suggestion.
But the point that Andre made, and then your response to it, Maryana. So I think, look. like there's a lot of, interests involved in these organizations, these think
Conflicting
tanks.
interests, I would say.
Yes,
very conflicting.
But like that's why I think, and you'll never have a perfect understanding. Like I don't know where the Consilience Project is getting its funding. My guess would be that people like what Schmachtenberger says. They donate to it. Are there people with interests that might, maybe donate to his cause because they have some benefit from, let's say, renewables? Maybe. I don't know. But like, there's always all these different interests. And I think if you're just talking about what they output and what they recommend, okay, well, let's look at what they recommend. And again, like, sometimes it is a proxy to know, like, okay, they were funded by fossil fuels, therefore, like, we can probably kind of like assume this is pretty biased. But it's not always the case. And I don't think it's fair to cast like a blanket assertion that, well, because we don't know where it's coming from, because these think tanks are usually funded by X, Y, and Z, that therefore we just disregard what they output. I don't think that is a fair like approach, especially when I think what people like Schmachtenberger have shown is things in good faith. And so I would recommend, again, looking at the ideas, because otherwise it is like you always have this kind of mystery of like, who funded this and what are their motives? And you can go on all day. So, but
to bring this back to what I care about in regards to the Metacrisis framework. So I got into the Metacrisis framework after reading Scott Alexander's Meditations on Moloch. And so what I'm concerned with are the incentives landscape. Scott Alexander has a great quote in his Meditations on Moloch that's something to the effect of, show me the landscape of incentives and I will show you the outcomes. And the idea behind that is the incentives that you have laid out in your systems will always dictate how people behave. There will always be selfless people who are willing to put aside their own self-interest, but the bulk of people, the bulk of the time, will follow their individual incentives. So the thing I care about is fixing incentives. And so I think a lot of proposals to fix incentives are pretty they're pretty non-controversial, like making elections less of a popularity contest and more aligned with the competence and being able to get the job done. Fixing incentives includes things like reducing the effects of lobbyists from large oil companies on congressmen, stuff like that. I like to think most of my opinions that come from my understanding of the Metacrisis are pretty non-controversial. The thing that I would press, though, is that not enough people are focusing on those system level, those incentive issues, and I think we need more emphasis on that. I think there's too much emphasis on like solving the individual problems and not enough on the upstream incentives. Is my take.
Right. And the evidence that we have that the current method of problem solving isn't great. Like we said, it's climate change. It's runaway artificial intelligence, potentially democratizing gene editing tools. It's things like 70% loss of monitored wildlife populations over the last 50 years, 70%, 50% loss of marine life, infertility rates in women. So it was 1 in 8 in the past, I think just a few decades ago. Now it's 1 in 5. Sperm count has decreased double the rate the 40 years prior. This is from the Consilience Project, or they're quoting a study that did this. But they found that a cost of about 7,000 times the annual global GDP is required to remove and destroy just one small subclass of PFAS chemicals from the environment. PFAS chemicals are the waterproofing chemicals added to different clothing and products.
That's what DuPont released.
Yeah.
They're massively.
And so that's 7,000 times the annual global GDP. Of course, it's a study, and you're like, where did they get these numbers? I don't know. I didn't read the study. But like, it is probably freaking expensive. That's the point, right? And I can go on and on and on. Like globally, 1 out of 6 deaths is caused by air pollution.
So
microplastics in testicles and arteries. Like, I mean, we just go down the list on and on and on and on.
To go back to something that Andre said at the beginning, I think, which is that we tend to forget about all of the successes while seeing all of these, yes, absolutely, really glaring issues and compounding issues. I think our ability to even know this information and certainly to do anything about it rests on a foundation of global wealth that we have amassed over time through capitalism mostly. To be able to have the science, the equipment, even to identify these things, to research them.
We wouldn't need to identify them if we didn't create the problem in the first place.
So in order to understand and solve these problems, we do need a baseline amount of wealth, right? Like even just like if we were to say the plastics problem, focusing on that, how are we going to fix the plastics problem? We've got all this plastic already in the ocean. It's already everywhere. We need some kind of technological solution to get it out. We need wealth in order to do that. And in order to have wealth, we need an economy. And what is our economy based around? Creating plastics. So this is the beautiful, irreconcilable, joyful chaos that we live in on a day-to-day basis where yes, we make things that cause problems, that cause harm to the world. But in making those things, we also create wealth and growth and progress, which allows us to fix more and more of that harm. And we've been living in a pretty like solid equilibrium. No, not everything is perfect, but there's no world in which we can stop wealth generation and just completely cut that off and continue to solve these massive, massive problems, which, as you point out, are huge and really dangerous to humanity. So I guess I wonder, in a world where we're focusing on these root causes and like really trying to like fix coordination problems, like how does wealth continue to get created? Why is that not one of the central core tenets of
it is? One of the core problems is how do you create a more circular economy, right? Because the truth is, although everything you said, like you described what's going on very well, and I don't disagree with like your general like description there, but the problem is like you're on a path of infinite economic growth that's exponential on a planet with finite resources, and that is there is a point of self-termination there for that economic system. And you talk about the Malthusian trap, like at some point that curve is falling off a goddamn cliff.
But you've read Wizard and the Prophet, right? And you know kind of the narrative of many, many times in history in which we thought we were reaching the end of something. And then technology came along to extract the last dollar or the last oil barrel, and then more of it, and then more of it, and then more of it.
Just to interject a little bit, I think what Levon is saying is not necessarily that we know when that's going to be, but that that cliff exists, and we won't be able to predict when the day before that is.
Sure.
Those are the kind of the only two premises you need to say we need to think about this.
The other thing that I want to add is that to create new technologies to avoid falling off the cliff, which I think humans are capable of it in the sense that we have the intelligence to do it. We have the ability in theory to cooperate. I think there's a lot of things that have to fall into place for us to do it. But I think for us to overcome that cliff ending, or avoid it altogether, is by talking about things like the Metacrisis and talking about better frameworks for problem solving so that we don't continue to create exponential technologies with these negative externalities. Like, that to me is so uncontroversial, and I don't understand how anyone could reject that. To say, hey, let's be a little bit more careful about the kind of technologies we develop and how we use it, because our track record right now is it is a whack-a-mole, right? We created, we extracted fossil fuels, we created like the gasoline engine, we did all this. And now we're like shitting on the planet hard. The climate's changing, habitat loss, this, that, and everything else as a result. we have all these people, but we've got to feed them. So we've cut down all these trees. We've depleted topsoil. We're doing monocrop, farming, like dead zones in the ocean the size of Europe. Like, holy shit. Okay. Because of the synthetic fertilizer that we needed, like all these things, like, wait a minute. Like, we scale the population in a way that was unsustainable long term. That is unsustainable long term. So now we have to figure out a way to get out of that.
Well, population growth is tapering and dropping over time as we get wealthier. Again, wealth. We're not talking about wealth, the key engine, the key driver of everything that we see today. Like
the key driver of also, the impact on social life in developed countries. When you compare it to other countries, it's sort of lacking, and that might be the most important thing when it comes to well-being. So we have made a lot of material progress, but I think
the Kuznets curve, where the wealthier society gets, the more it cares about environmental impact. The wealthier a society gets, the more it cares about a runaway population. There are ways in which progress makes us more enlightened, and maybe this is a good segue into Steven Pinker, but you can't ignore the positive repercussions of getting more wealth, getting more knowledge, getting more technology.
But did you see there, and you've made this a similar point before in this discussion, the positives of this growth is to address the problems created by the growth itself. And so that's the point that I'm trying to reiterate, that we need to try to figure out how to get out of that loop. Right? That's kind of what the Metacrisis says, is can we try to
to play devil's advocate here for a second. I would say that the idea behind using the positives of progress to address the negatives of progress, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. Like, the idea here is that you create excess wealth, and then you use some amount of that excess wealth to address the negative externalities of the wealth. And you don't have, it's not like you're just patching a leaky bucket necessarily. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. You also mentioned earlier how you don't see how people can disagree with the idea that we need to avoid negative externalities. If I were to play devil's advocate on that, I would say there's this idea of Mott and Bailey, where people present one very unobjectionable, obvious idea, and then but hiding behind that is some other proposal or idea that is smuggled in. And I think what some people might be concerned with is that people propose the Metacrisis as like this really unobjectionable, or we're just trying to avoid negative externalities. And the fear is that it's trying to smuggle in some other proposals like fucking communism or something.
Or God Emperor Schmachtenberger ruling over us and his benevolence.
He's going to fuse with a worm.
So I think those are important things to address. And so to address that first point about progress, to counter my own model of that objection, I would say that that is a cool thing about progress, is that we can use it to fix the problems we create. And we very likely will solve things like climate change or nuclear war and biorisk. But the problem is that we can solve any number of these things. But unless we fix the landscape of incentives that created these problems, we're just going to end up with more exponential growth and more exponential problems until we end up with a problem that we both fail to solve, which we will, and has catastrophic consequences that we cannot undo.
Don't forget the asymmetry of this issue, right? You only need to get it wrong once. You only need to hit one catastrophic or existential risk. You can solve 9 of them, but you only need to get it wrong once. And so I think that's the scary part about the exponential issues. But Andre, I think you were trying to make a point earlier. You had your hand up.
My hand, but no.
Excuse me. Yeah, please let me talk.
I think I agree with Maryana's point about wealth. And I think that the issue is that the wealth that has been created in the past century was created under regulated environments that either put caps on the amount of wealth that could be generated or had a funnel for a portion of that wealth to be adequately channeled into funding institutions that we've created. And I think the problem we're facing, and this might feed into the overall, oh, there he goes. I think the problem we're facing is, and this is to the point that, yeah, that's it. Done. Mic drop. The problem we're facing, and this is with regards to maybe an unprecedented scenario we're facing down in this day and age, is that at least in the United States, everything is, the market is so unregulated at this point, uniquely so, I think, in the past 100 years, that the wealth generation that's happening isn't being channeled back to fund the same institutions that could be resolving some of these challenges that we're talking about. Is everybody just, okay, there, okay, good. He's back. I was,
I'm listening. I'm listening.
Fuck it. We're going to start our own podcast. No, fuck these guys. So, and I think, to me, one of the greatest frustrations with, again, the second tier of the meta crisis, as Alex described it, right? That this push for like finding solutions or like drawing some sort of like thought process into action is the fact that it's never about passing additional regulations and tighter controls on the market and toppling monopolies and creating a more balanced and stable economic force as it may have been 100 years ago. It's always about, oh, let's find some sort of like new institution or new pathway we can create. But I think that, yes, wealth is the answer, and prompting the generation of that wealth is the answer, but finding a funnel away from that wealth to ensure the resources are adequately going into the institutions that are designed to address things like climate change and address things like nuclear arms control. That is the only way we're going to get out of this. And I think it has to be communist. Fucking I think that is kind of the central tenet that I think has to underpin everything, is that we know what's causing these problems. And I think Yvonne will probably agree that the problems are being caused by the same systems that are generating the wealth and development that we're facing. And the unintended consequence of wealth generation is the set series of crises we're facing now. That means we have to regulate the process of wealth generation. But that's not what's being discussed in some of these frameworks. We're trying to talk about new institutions, new ways to maybe address the problems we're facing, but the solutions are all there. We know what the solutions are because we know what the culprit is.
But don't you think, Andre, the problem is, like, even if you were to use the existing institutions to enact the kind of regulations that you'd want to prevent some of these externalities from occurring, you still have the flaws in the existing systems which allow for the corruption to enter, and then you've got corporate interests take over, and then now you don't have the kind of regulations that you need, right? And I think that will be my biggest thing. That will be my biggest issue with some of the existing systems, is that they are the checks on them and the way that they're built is not like strong enough for the modern environment and for the modern power of like corporations, like these multinational corporations.
Quick interjection before we start talking past each other. I think it's important to. I don't want to get hung up on the idea of overhauling systems versus creating new systems or tweaking systems, because anytime you make a single change to a system, you technically have a different system. So let's not get too hung up on the debate.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think from a standpoint of institutions, granting an institution that, like, again, let's talk about the EPA, right? We can agree that the solution to climate change I don't know if we can agree on that, but let's say we equip the EPA to greater enforce some of the recommendations they make, right? That, not drilling on protected lands in Alaska is something that will be protected as like a legal standard. And we can give the EPA the teeth to enforce those sort of things and to ensure those positions are never removed or bypassed through the court system, for instance. That's not necessarily like completely creating a brand new world. That's just equipping an agency with a task to adequately do its job, to adequately address the problem it's been organized too.
Well,
Yeah,
but if
yeah.
that leads to less oil and less ability for the U.S. to generate revenue off that oil, then it could lead to the catastrophic collapse of the U.S. economy.
So it's the Metacrisis, I guess.
Yeah. This is what I'm talking about. I just wanted to make sure that we talk about the concrete proposals and not debate the merits of like changing a system versus creating a new system. I think just keeping it as concrete as possible is important.
By concrete proposals, do you mean the proposal that we've made?
Yeah, I mean, like
the only concrete proposal made on the Metacrisis front.
Yeah, I mean, we are pioneers in that sense.
Yeah. So just I just wanted to put a flag there.
Sure, fair.
Because I know a lot of people, like when you start talking about changing systems, like I think a lot of people get leery of that, and rightfully so. Like, are you proposing central planning? Like, what the hell are you doing? And sometimes, all you're asking is, okay, maybe we should do some election reform.
Well, I think there are systems that you could try to, put into motion that grow organically and scale up so that you don't have this like catastrophe of like, oh shit, we've implemented this global system and now we didn't see this unintended consequences of it, and now it's totally fucked everything up. Right? You could propose something like the Meta Treaty model, which starts maybe between an agreement, between a few nations and then grows. Right? So like, that's one of the beauties of the model that we propose because we're geniuses and we're so good and we are leading the way.
This is what happens in a bunch of white collar dudes.
But but hold on. So I think
Silicon Valley elites.
Maryana brought up a very valid point, and this is like the steel man, right? Of like, and this is also like what the people in the fossil fuel industry would claim. It's like, oh, you try to do this to fossil fuels, you're gonna fuck everything up. The whole economy is gonna get fucked up, and then look at all this damage. And it is true that you need to be very mindful of trying to alter the core components of the features of our economic system, and like fossil fuels are almost, they're correlated like I think 99% with like GDP. Like it's a crazy. It is something that you have to be very careful of, and that's obviously the biggest obstacle that climate activists face. Is like, how do you move away from fossil fuels in a timely manner, but
without messing up the entire
not end up resulting in economic collapse, which ends up killing, billions of people, or let's say, or something, right? So that is an absolutely valid concern. But I think like to kind of like make this a little more abstract, when you're talking about proposing new things and the negative consequences potentially of those things, like the regulations that Andre mentioned, maybe let's look at environmental stuff. Like let's look at the PFAS chemicals, right? So if there was a regulation that said, okay, for these novel chemicals, you're going to have to do more testing, right? We could have avoided putting these chemicals in, which are now everywhere, whether you're in Antarctica or you're in, the tropics. Like they are literally everywhere. We could have avoided that if we had proper regulation around this. And it's like, that's what the Metacrisis framework would have said. It said, hey, you've got a novel chemical. Hold on. We have a track record of adding like lead to gasoline and all this shit that hasn't turned out well. The precedent is not good. We've extracted all these chemicals from the earth, synthesized them, whatever. And like biological organisms are not adapted to handle these things. Let's learn from the past and let's say, okay, we need better regulation. If that slows the economy down a little bit, that's worth avoiding a catastrophic risk of we've got infertility, we've got cancer, and it's going to take 7,000 times the global GDP to remove these chemicals from the environment.
But I think
what's that going to do to the economy in the future, right? So it is a bit short-term sighted, and I think we do have to gradually move away. That's why this whole growth imperative to construct global economy, the global society based on a exponential growth imperative is suicidal. Like it is ultimately suicidal, barring some magical technologies in the future or some other way of creating like infinite wealth.
So what is the mechanism that you think would have come up with this regulation? Some kind of global EPA? Is that?
We have a pretty, especially for like the PFAS chemicals, like we have a culprit, and we have an incident over like a span of 2 years in West Virginia and Ohio where DuPont was just dumping this shit into the water system. I think that's what kind of caused like the whole global spread of it, if I'm not mistaken.
I mean, that probably contributed to it, but it's in like every like rain code and.
So just a quick interjection there, like you will not find any kind of consensus on what the actual solution is. This is the Metacrisis is more of a set of questions than it is a concrete proposal of solutions. The only solution proposed is we need to do something different.
That's not a solution.
Well, hold on. I disagree. Yes. No, Alex, I disagree. I think at this point there are certain things like novel chemicals where it's pretty clear we need to do better testing.
But who defines what a novel chemical is, and who decides whether the risks are worth it? Like you need some agency.
Yes, no, I agree. But like you need some sort of treaty to try to regulate novel chemicals.
And what have we seen in the U.S. when it comes to, for example, the FDA and their track record of excellence in this regard? We probably have the most sophisticated, I mean, I guess the EU has that thing, but we've got a very sophisticated agency that monitors for new innovations in food and drugs. And, there's been quite a lot of talk recently about how the lack of coordination just within this one agency, a lack of ability to understand and absorb and rapidly recommend new technological drug solutions for existing massive problems that cause the deaths of millions of people leads
that
to
we created, by the way, inadvertently.
So yes. why do you think that a global agency, not even just like a local national level, but a global agency would be any better, any more effective at coordinating in itself to understand, to recommend, to solve these massive problems? Like, how would that work?
So there's tiers to this, right? There's tiers to this. So a global treaty could be something that is after the fact, after a new chemical is introduced. If we can do the testing,
if it's a new chemical introduced, it's going to be introduced, and it's going to be a global chemical, right? So like, no, but like
we could solution. It could be a mitigation measure, but nationally speaking, I think. Sorry, there was another point I was trying to make. It just got away from me. What did you mention about the FDA? You said they're not. Whatever, we have them. They're not doing a great job.
But there's a bunch of other drugs they don't approve that could massively save lives and improve lives that they just don't get to, or it's slow. Or
so, I mean, I think the solution is simple. Then I think we need to adequately fund and staff the FDA. Then, because there is an agency in the U.S. that has jurisdiction over this that needs to be doing this. And I think, Maryana, to the point you made at the very beginning of our discussion, that this is how, let's say, within the microcosm of the United States, that things have functioned, where we identify problems, we organize institutions to address these problems. These institutions are initially ineffective. We reform them. We may have like a visionary group of individuals that pioneer a certain form of management with those institutions. They're successful. They start getting less successful. We reform them. I mean, it's in a way a microcosm of this model of humanity that you were talking about, that the gradualism of American institutions is how we address problems and how we make things incrementally better for people. I mean, in the 19th century, we had sweatshops for children.
Right.
Kids are getting their fingers cut off. The Department of Labor came into force. It was adequately staffed to run these investigations. We passed laws to ensure that certain labor standards are met. I think, So I think we have. Sorry, Alex, go ahead.
Just to add to something I said a few minutes ago. The Metacrisis says that we need to do something different at the systems level to fix the incentives landscape that causes these problems. And that when you have global incentives, you need some kind of global system of coordination. That doesn't. I don't.
Which we've never had. It's never existed.
I mean,
we have though. No, that's not true.
So the telecommunications
a truly global system of coordination.
So Yeah. So the Montreal Protocol is a fantastic example of a global coordination system that we use to solve a global problem. And that is like one of the biggest successes in environmentalism that we have. And something like that, it doesn't even have to be a treaty. It could be something entirely different. But we've done this, and the problem when you have a global problem, you need to have some kind of global solution.
Does every nation sign on to the Montreal Protocol? What about North Korea? What about
almost certainly not? So,
well, there you go. It only takes one defector for rogue AI or whatever, any of these.
But it's still better than only one nation working on the problem. Like it's an aspirational thing to shoot for.
Sure.
And we have the International Postal Agency and the International Telecommunications Union that are two like fantastic
examples. That's another great example
of fully functional global coordination to
not
achieve.
Not in North Korea, but yes.
I'm pretty sure you could still access North Korean.
Send a letter to North Korea.
Have you tried?
Yeah. So we can deal with North Korea after we figured everyone else.
Yes. Yes.
So let's not make the perfect the enemy of the pretty good now. So I think we know that there are global problems. We know we've made global solutions in the past. And we know the trajectory of both progress and the negative externalities of that progress. And we know that there are well-defined incentives that are causing these various issues. We might solve 9 out of 10 of them. We might solve every problem we currently face, but unless we fix the landscape of incentives that created these, eventually we'll hit a problem that we can't fix. And due to the exponential nature of problems, one of the ones we can't fix will eventually be one that's catastrophic. And that's my summation of the
or just the heat death of the sun, whichever comes first.
Right. Well, I want to hold on. I do want to reiterate the point Alex made. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and I think that is my response to your criticism of the FDA, Maryana. That because there's all these other things they could have been approving that could save lives, but because of the regulation, they don't do it, and so it's. I guess I don't know, saying it's a net negative, but it's
what I'm saying is there's trade-offs. There's always going to be trade-offs. So you let's say you create this global agency that regulates new novel chemical introduction into the world. There's going to be a trade-off. There's going to be a trade-off of there might be some novel chemical that will like be really, really great for humanity, and there might be some novel chemical that will be terrible for humanity. So somebody's going to have to evaluate and decide which is which and like make the call, and it's imperfect and probably will get it wrong a bunch and stymie progress and introduce bad new chemicals in still.
Maybe
maybe get a little better at it, maybe, but it's, again, we're continuing the thing that we're already doing. Yeah.
But maybe like, if you do have some international organization that tries to look at novel chemicals, maybe you look at the cost versus benefit, right? Like, oh, this new chemical can revolutionize X and it's worth taking a higher risk, right? And like, so I think we can come up with a system like that, but
we have a system like that. It's called the FDA in the US. So what you're saying is let's make it global. Yes. And I'm saying that'll introduce more complexity. The FDA is already really slow and sclerotic just within one nation. You don't think there's going to be massive
would you rather not
interest?
have an FDA?
China's going to be like, I developed this chemical. Let's get this chemical out there.
Would you rather not have an? Okay, no, so then what's then you accept that you're saying the trade-off is worth it, is what you're saying.
I'm saying that replicating what we have and making it global, and
well,
having
we can improve it. We can try to improve
it. How?
Well, we have to do research. Well, we have to do research into it, and and like Andre said, it's a very good point that he made. It's like it has to have adequate resources and funding. If it doesn't have it, then what can you expect from it, right? It's like the conversations I've had with a lot of people on the right, where they're like, "Oh, teachers are terrible. We don't need to pay. They don't deserve to get paid more." It's like, well, what if they're terrible because they're not getting like the people that go into teaching aren't like, the best potential candidates because the pay is so low. Like it's like, okay, like, come on, so the same problem.
I don't necessarily think the particular solution is to give the FDA more money, but I think there's a lot of really good ideas from people who are smarter than I am on what the problems with the FDA are and how to fix those things. I'd be especially interested in, again, the systems and incentive solutions for that. And then, being able to scale that up in whatever way we can would be cool. We don't even necessarily need one big FDA. We could have a bunch of FDAs and have some kind of coordination mechanism. I don't know, but I think having solutions at the scale of our problems is important.
Correct. And I think we have those institutions at the scale of problems, tailor-made to address specific things. Do they do it well or not? Well, that is something that we can actually
things,
influence.
Andre?
Well, again,
specific.
So again, to the point of the FDA, right? The FDA has a specific purview of things it addresses, and there's a reason why it was incorporated. So to speak.
I was thinking more globally.
Oh, well,
nationally, yes, you're right.
And I think international coordination, we spent like 2 episodes talking about it. Like I think it's you start stepping into a lot of bullshit because there is the proverbial North Korea that is.
But even also Russia and Iran and all these nations that have their own completely different set of priorities and goals. Today, they don't give a shit about human progress. They're like, right. How do we kill the Jews?
They may sooner than later, though, when the things start impacting them. And the thing is, like, at some point, we're going to need a system. It's better to try to lay the groundwork or try to understand what could that system be now. And in the meantime, maybe, kind of one-off treaties for particular issues is the way to go, right? Maybe a one-off treaty for, like, banning PFAS. Maybe one-off treaties for X, Y, and Z, like rainforest preservation, because that's a huge factor in climate change. Like, I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying.
To go to Mariana's point, like there are countries that just flat out don't care about human well-being and human progress, and that itself is like again, like I keep hammering on, it's part of the incentives landscape that we deal with, and so part of the meta crisis would be addressing like that's upstream of coordination, of making everyone care about the same things. Like, how do you go about enacting a cultural mindset shift?
I think we could all unite around the fact that no country cares about human well-being at this point, and I think that is that's a great starting place, right? I mean, to be frank, I don't want to step into the terms of like geopolitics and how narratives over certain countries are shaped because we live in a certain country, and I think at scale, at a micro scale, everybody cares about people. You care about your friends, you care about your family, barring, if you're a lunatic. But I think, I don't know if we should go in that direction, because defining a place as uncaring for its population is a subjective thing to a certain extent.
I suppose. I think it's pretty clear, though, that there are some more caring of human well-being than others.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is difficult to. So currently, most countries just care about their
survival,
their gross domestic product. Their GDP tends to be the thing that they optimize for, which is closely aligned.
Or Russia.
And I think it's deeper than that. I think if you dissect it further, most countries care about survival. GDP is an expression of that.
Yeah, so the survival upstream of GDP, and I think GDP is upstream of well-being for a lot of countries. Survival, GDP is often correlated with survival. Some people don't care about that as much, and then some countries care about GDP, which is somewhat correlated with well-being, but not perfectly. And whenever you try to optimize for a particular metric, there's the classic problem of perversely optimizing a utility function, where you end up, what's the good farting, I believe is the term, where you optimize for a thing that you think that you care about, but once you optimize for it, you don't actually want those outcomes. I think a lot of countries tend to do that, but that's kind of getting off track. The idea here is that to whatever extent we think that there's a country that doesn't sufficiently care about human well-being, I think that is a cultural issue, and I think that is still part of the incentives landscape we have to care about if we care about the meta crisis.
There's definitely a larger education issue that, pure self-interest leads to kind of like self-termination in any sort of like biological, I think, environment. I think if you should, at least in a social species, with the competitive dynamics,
hasn't killed us yet.
No, but
we're still here.
But it's not just
worked out pretty well for us so far.
Well, it's not just pure self-interest though. Like we've evolved to be more altruistic.
Well, that's Mott and Bailey. That's Mott and Bailey right there. That's classic. Come on.
No, I mean, no. I don't see it that way. So, I think. What?
Yeah. To maybe rephrase to be more concise. I think self-interest definitely leads to coordination failures that lead to bad outcomes for everyone. Even if it's not necessarily termination, I think that's always on the table. But we uncontroversially find ourselves in situations where everyone follows their self-interest, and everyone ends up in a situation where they're worse off. Like Levon, I fully agree that the Metacrisis is a scalable issue. Because I think I'm the one that actually talked about dating apps as an example of the Metacrisis.
I didn't catch that one.
Because no state-issued girlfriend.
2 seconds.
That was a few episodes ago.
Okay.
So dating apps are a very good example of a Malachian trap where you have men swiping right on women, but because there's more men than women, women get overwhelmed and then end up not swiping as much on men, which requires the men to swipe more to get more matches, which makes women more overwhelmed and not swipe as much on men in this never-ending feedback loop. Everyone is doing what makes sense for them, but then everyone ends up in a situation that is worse off. And that is one example of how dating apps are an example of the Metacrisis or Malachian systems, aka. But yes, what was I saying? I was talking about, I forget what I was talking about. But
self-interest and collective well-being.
Self-interest and collective well-being. I think that you have to keep both of those principles in mind whenever you're acting as an agent or as a system or as a group. You have to keep both of those things in mind because they are not necessarily aligned. And I think that is my fundamental thesis.
Well, congratulations. Yeah.
I think is really interesting about this whole Metacrisis framing is it's allowing us to go from such extremes across the board of human knowledge, going deep into like forever chemicals and then segueing into geopolitical debates and then coming all the way around to dating apps, which, should be an indication to you that like something might be a little bit sus. If this framework can encompass literally everything and allows us to have these conversations that at the end of the day don't really have much of a stake in anything because none of us can fix any of these problems. We're just sort of trying to understand, trying to debate. It's the perfect framework for young 30-something men lost in a meaning crisis.
No. I think the very problem here is that we have only narrow specialists working on things, and that's why we continue to create these unintended consequences because we haven't taken a more holistic approach. And if you had generalists which try to look at everything from a broader perspective, that might actually be helpful. And so I completely disagree with that, Maryana. I think the reductionism and the narrow solution space and narrow framing of problems is one of the big problems in and of itself. There was something else you mentioned, but it just slipped my mind. So, Andre, I think
I really enjoy Maryana's introduction of us into the greater hierarchy of like the spiritual successors to Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson, because I think to a certain extent, I do agree that. Not necessarily within this particular group that's gathered here today, but I do think there is wisdom in like individuals online seeking out lenses through which they can see the world, but then not actually translating it to anything concrete, which is why we have made it a point in most of the discussions we've had on this topic in the past to try to bring it back to like, well, what is an actionable thing that you can do? And for me, as everybody likely understands now, it does come down to like, well, like, fucking go and participate in your local like political process somehow. I mean, go to your ward meetings, go yell at your city councilor, like anything like that. Because at the end of the day, we're like, that is a risk that I think this kind of framework does run, is we're just going to be fucking little Andrew Tate Sims, posting memes and video clips of Daniel Schmachtenberger. I think that there is a risk for that. And I think it's important to call that out. And I don't necessarily agree it's like a granted fate that we're all going to like stumble into, that we're just kind of spinning in the same circles. And I think maybe this is where a gentler analysis for Yvonne would be that Yvonne does have hope that he's not just going to be continuously like falling into the same online trap that men of our age fall into, that there is a pathway for this to kind of go into something more constructive.
Yeah, Yvonne, tell us, like, what are you taking away from all of this besides starting a podcast, which a little bit recursive though, but like what are the actions you're taking?
Well,
beyond spreading the meme.
Well, I think spreading the message is absolutely important because so many people don't even believe in basic
top G.
Yeah, I didn't catch that. What was that?
Oh, just spreading the gospel. Yeah.
Spreading the gospel. No, I think that is honestly step one. It is to spread the message, because I think it's not even close to being heard at the level it needs to in society. I think this has to be the sort of metacrisis approach to problem solving. And whether you want to call it a metacrisis or not, whether you want to call it critical thinking or not, whatever term you want to use, but a better approach to making sense of our world and how we create solutions, that has to be more commonplace in society. And I think the metacrisis framework is very convenient in trying to get that message across. And I think it's actually great that you have people like Schmachtenberger who can be memeified in certain ways because it helps spread the message. And so I am actually all for it. And I think we have to leverage.
Pays his bills. Right. I mean, he doesn't have a real job.
I don't know how his bills get paid.
The big mystery. Maybe he has an OnlyFans.
I mean, look, let me know if you find
pics.
But
little hobbit feet. Yeah.
But like, I think for me, I do think like the podcasting is important, and I'm not going to actually trivialize it in the ways that sometimes I think Andre does, for example. I think it's important because I think that's the way a lot of people are consuming information. Right. And so like, I think like be a voice out there that tries to, instead of promote like anti-vax nonsense, like Joe Rogan's podcast, how about try to promote a message that has actual utility, like a systems level understanding of things. Like that's a good thing. Like I'm not concerned about spreading like a dangerous idea or anything like that. I think there's a lot of good here. And so I think step one is the messaging. And that is one of the most difficult problems, because if you can change culture, all of a sudden the political reality or the political feasibility of certain, let's say, policy suggestions that might arise from this culture is now it's just more feasible, right? Like that increases as people become more aware of these things. And so, like, I mean, that honestly, that just feeds into Andre's point. It's like, yeah, I mean, you should be involved in your local politics, in your national politics. But if you're only involved in those things and you're only like, you're not thinking about things from a broader standpoint, you're not fully knowledgeable about the issues and their root causes, then are you supporting the right policies? Are you voting for the right people? Right? Like, it's kind of like very fundamental to have, a correct understanding of what's happening. And this isn't a Schmachtenberger quote, but he's used it. And it's a problem well stated is a problem half solved. And I think the metacrisis helps us state problems starting from their root. And I don't see how anyone could disagree that that's useful. That is a useful way to frame things. Of course, when you get to like creating the most technical solutions, sure, you have to have a more reductionist approach. You have to focus in on the specifics, like Maryana says. There's utility in that. But I think what Schmachtenberger, if he was here, he would emphasize like we've done way too much of that and not enough of the more broader systemic level kind of analysis. And that, again, is completely uncontroversial in my mind. I genuinely don't see how someone would argue against that. But yeah, I mean, as far as what I'm doing, like the Metacrisis stuff, I want to do more things in person. I'm trying to currently get a lecture scheduled at a local university on the Metacrisis. So like, I think, you know, Andres talked about this. You know, he's right. You can't just stay online. Like, I think part of the problem is that we're too online. Part of the Metacrisis is that like we're just too fucking online. So like
it's the snake eating itself at some point.
Yeah. So I think you do have to get in the real world and do things on that level. And you know, we talked in the last episode about what would a grassroots Metacrisis movement look like. I mean, that's something that we're still discussing, and you know, on some level, maybe it requires, you know, concrete things like, do you build a digital platform for the Metacrisis? Do you create a Discord channel? Or like, do you do X, Y, and Z to get something in place, some sort of organization in place to get like-minded people together and try to work on these things? I mean,
try to work on which things? On spreading the message more, or what is the
could be a number of things. Alex mentioned something really interesting the other day, like a meta organization for kind of coordinating all the different organizations that are already working on, you know, kind of
Metacrisis.
Yeah, Metacrisis related things, right?
Meta cubed.
Yeah, there's ironically a coordination issue among people who are working on the Metacrisis.
Well, that should tell you something, right? That should actually really be an important salient data point.
No,
it should tell you that coordination is really hard.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, we should try to figure it out, right?
Figure out how to do better coordination. Yeah.
It's almost like there wasn't a political movement in the 19th and 20th century that was able to do all of this. It's like some red flag waving political movement that had people organized across countries and continents.
Yeah. So, but yeah, more actionably, I think a lot of things I'm trying to do is helping people think more about how they think. Like, I started the Kansas City Rationality and Effective Altruism community. I started the Guild of the Rose self-improvement community. I do street epistemology. Like, I want people to be able to zoom out a little bit and think about how they think and how their decisions affect the world around them.
Y'all, what if it's just CRISPR? What if that's the real answer to everything?
Like increase IQ?
Make everyone I'm actually not really kidding.
Yeah, but then people are just going to be sitting around talking and nobody's ever going to get anything done.
That is literally exactly what's going to happen.
That
is exactly what's going to happen.
Well. Yeah.
Emotional intelligence. Yeah.
Make them more extroverted.
Yeah.
We can only resolve
more wars because everybody is just like
because smart.
White collar layabouts. It's just going to be.
No,
I think
wars.
The solution is to create a white collar and blue collar version of Schmachtenberger, and like everyone becomes Schmachtenberger. Like you just have
clones.
He's going for like the Jeffrey Epstein plot to like inseminate a bunch of people to like have his offspring like rule the world.
Gross.
Yeah.
Damn,
Andre, stop projecting your fantasies on Schmachtenberger.
I do have to say, like, I don't think I have thought about just perpetuating the same shit that's being already done by like the people we like ridicule and mock.
Like, we don't. What is that though? What are you talking about?
Like you know, we've talked a lot of smack on like Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate has a prism through which he sees all the problems in the world. And I'm sure Andrew Tate also tells his people to go outside and like lift weights and shit. But at the end of the day, it's just like consumption of online based content. Like, and I don't think we're going down that path. I'm just sensitive to the fact that, wait, holy fuck. Like,
good. That's recursion. That's like, you got recursion built in.
Self-criticism. It's an element of the socialist movement. Yeah, it's, I do think that's,
yeah.
I mean, socialism 2.0.
Be mindful of the narratives you're consuming and transmitting in the world. And remember that at the end of the day, you're one person, world big, history big, time long. You're not going to get a lot done in this.
And I do think it's
what you devote your energy to wisely.
if you look at like the and I don't have like hard data on this, so let me preface what I'm going to say by that, but I do suspect that the individuals that are like prone to consuming Andrew Tate, Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson in bulk are probably located in a handful of countries, and those handful of countries probably have very developed economies and are generating the crisis of meaning that you referred to, Maryana, for men. Mm-hmm. And I think at the end of the day is like somebody working 2 jobs in rural Malaysia really going to give a shit about Daniel Schmachtenberger and the Metacrisis? But herein lies the issue, right? Because if the problems that he's talking about are going to be impacting Malaysian worker X, well, how do we ensure that it's communicated?
The elites. It has to come down to the elites. Yeah. They are the key to solving all the problems in the world.
God damn it. Just fucking pay your taxes, people.
Well, I do need to wrap this up. I know we could keep talking about this forever, but
literally, that is the model.
Wow.
An infinite spectrum of content can be milked out of this.
24/7 live
24/7 like that church, like the IHOP church.
It'd be like a hot tub stream on Twitch, just Levon in a hot tub talking about the Metacrisis.
We have so much potential.
I enjoyed this.
I'll probably move that to OnlyFans.
Yeah, monetize that shit. Parting thoughts. Concluding.
We'll let you offer some parting thoughts, Maryana.
Oh, I do continue to. I'm excited about people being enthusiastic to change the world and engage with it at a deeper level. I think we really don't disagree that much, but on the particulars, there's definitely some deltas. I continue to think that the best way to make the world a bit better place than where you left it is to pick a small thing, pick a small problem. Don't try to solve everything. There's just no way you're going to do it. Pick one small thing, understand it really well, care about it, love it, fight for it. And I know this is in total contradiction to the Schmachtenberger philosophy, but I really do think that's how all the wealth and beauty that we have today originated, was people 50%. Picking small things to care about.
It's like 50% right, because then like you want to put it into the broader context and see what your narrow thing that's all it says. But that's all it's saying, and I think we do agree with that. I think we agree that considering the whole is a good idea.
You don't have any interest in any one small thing. You're interested in the bigger thing. Which I get.
Well, there's a place for that too. There's a place for people that just look at the small things.
What is your small thing?
But then there's a place for people who try to look at
what is the small thing you're doing? What is the small thing that you care
No, I'm saying there's a place for both. I'm saying there's a place for generalists and there's a place for specialists. And how's that controversial?
Specialists go in the gulag and the generalists.
Well, if they develop PFAS chemicals, then they go
straight to the wall. Yeah.
Yeah,
specialists go to the gulag.
Is Maryana saying specialists go to the gulag? Yeah.
All right. Well, we will agree to disagree, but we'll see how things go. So, carbon emissions are supposed to be cut in half by the end of the decade, and then again cut in half by 2040, and then again cut in half by 2050, for us to avoid some of the worst aspects of climate change and runaway feedback loops and all that whatnot. So we'll see. Maybe sooner or later. Maybe we'll in 10, 20 years we'll get Maryana back on the podcast.
If podcasts exist, if there's even internet, we'll have a reunion and we'll talk.
We'll do our conversation in a cave somewhere.
Yeah, underwater.
In person, like the Lord
I'll
intended.
Be like, things are going great. It's awesome. I love living underwater.
Capitalism is amazing.
Don't you love the progress we've made?
Yeah.
Or we'll be living in a utopia, and Levon can tell us how we're still going to.
We'll have the first equitable dating app.
Oh, that's a dream. Okay, that's a pipe dream. Singularity, utopia. I'm on board with that. I can see that. I don't see any equity.
The dating app, never.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, great discussion. Maryana, thank you very much for coming on. Alex.
Yeah, love this.
Alex, always pleasant.
Alex, thank you.
Every time I see you guys debating this, I'm coming in like at the very end, or I'm distracted with the side conversation. So it was fun to see you guys to engage with this and.
Yeah. Maryana and I have had scuffles in the past on this very topic.
Usually there's a lot more alcohol involved, so that's why I'm not being so fighty, because I'm sober right now.
We'll do that next time.
Everybody takes an edible and must debate the Metacrisis.